So, Eva, welcome and thank you so much for coming along today. I usually conduct these interviews, I find myself doing them in the evening, so it's really lovely to be meeting you in the morning and to start the day by speaking to you and having this interview opportunity with you. But how are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm good. It's a nice day outside. It's finally spring, so this is good. Yeah. And you?
Yes, I'm well, thank you. I'm well, thank you. It's also spring here and it's very nice. It's nice to have that change and that kind of rejuvenation of the world, especially at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in London that there's been opening, yeah, in UK.
Indeed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
So,
I'm happy to be here. Yeah. Very excited to talk about existentialism.
and for those who aren't familiar with your work already, would you like to introduce yourself?
Mhm. Well, my name is Iva Paska. I'm a sociologist by vocation, and I work at University North. It is a university at the north of Croatia, and it is a relatively modern university. I mean, not that old, but it's very like interdisciplinary. And I try to combine in my work, I try to combine philosophy and existential writers and sociology and social sciences and existentialism. So I also I also have a blog which is about existentialism, but also about other meaning-making approaches. And there I try to just share things that I find in my quest in existentialism and in my encounter with other approaches. And I try to like take everyday situations that we all encounter or some more non-standardized forms of human experience. And then I try to see how they would be understood through some meaning-making approaches. Like, for example, recently there was more massive earthquakes in Croatia, and so then I tried to explore how you can see earthquake in this situation because people were pretty shocked and like had a bit of trauma, and then I tried to see how you can explore this situation from the existential perspective, like through the existential lens. Or obviously this situation that we have all found ourselves in recent year and a half with coronavirus. I also tried to look at it through existential lens. And these kinds of articles or researches is what I try to like share with the world and also with the region, because I think that it is particularly important that this is also partly why I'm so excited about this interview, because I think it's so important to like spread the word of existentialism more, like, because I think it's a really, really valuable approach and it's a bit like underemphasized today, perhaps. And so, yeah.
Oh, I completely agree, and I would love to have the opportunity, like hopefully in the description wherever this ends up being published, for you to share a link to your blog, because I think you make such an important point there, that these existential theories are undershared in the kind of mainstream thinking, but like you're saying, they're so applicable to day-to-day life, and they're so, for us to be able to have the opportunity to study it ourselves, but then bring it to the wider population, and obviously with the wonders of Zoom, we have the option to speak internationally as well. And obviously,
Definitely.
Yeah, and we have these great names of these philosophers, but also people like yourself, alive and well and speaking and writing and thinking today, and I have the opportunity to share your work as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I see a lot when I talk to different people, because I'm always like, I'm passionate about existentialism, so I want to talk about it a lot, but I see that people, in a lot of cases, people are not that familiar with this, philosophy or psychotherapy, and I think it's such a shame because, it's so valuable. Okay, now perhaps it's a bit more in the mainstream these days, like with Irvin Yalom and I don't know, similar theorists. But basically, when you try to talk to people, I don't know, just getting coffee or something, and you know, they have never heard of existentialism or don't know how this applies. And it's such, I mean, it's like a diamond that's waiting to be discovered, if you ask me. But I'm really passionate about it, so yeah.
Why do you think that it is that people, you know, haven't come across it, or if they have, that it's felt, you know, that they haven't felt being able to connect with it?
Well, yeah, that's a complex question. I'm kind of trying to figure out it myself also, because I'm not yet sure, but I think it perhaps has something to do with, like, you know, socio-historical conditions of formation of this psychotherapy, because because I'm trained in social sciences, then it's always that I try to look at, like, at like which paradigm are we now in, or which, I think it has something to do with these paradigms, like, yeah, you know, like, for example, because I don't know, in the 60s of the 20th century, there was this kind of thinking that I'm calling like contextual thinking. It was like coming to the forefront, or it's at least my impression. But then something happened, like after that, I think perhaps it was the, I don't know, the like medicalization of like human experience, or like perhaps it has something to do with capitalism also. And, you know, existentialism is like, it emphasizes human experience. It does not try to put human experience into boxes. So, like, this current system is very prone to putting experience into boxes because it's easier, or because it's more efficient, or because it's more like, it's more systematized. It's like it's like, I think it has to do with capitalism and with processes of rationalization, if you ask me. Like, because it's always like, let's do something that's most effective, or like that's a fastest, that's a quick fix, that will be cheapest. But also, I think one has to ask oneself if this is really, if you look at the wider picture, is this really like the most effective? Because what tends to get lost in this process of like quick fix, for example, when it comes to human experience, I think that that in a lot of cases today, like, human experience tends to be dealt with like it's a commodity, and perhaps it has something to do, you know, with like capitalism and this way of thinking. But is it really a commodity? You know, can you approach it like that? I can make some examples later when we, yeah. So I think it has something to do with this, but I'm very like optimistic, because now I see that it's getting more and more into the mainstream. Yeah, so I hope that we will also contribute to that.
It's so valuable to have a different approach, and you make me realize that I primarily communicate with therapists, so it's so fascinating to hear a kind of a sociological perspective on it as well. And in terms of making it more accessible to the mainstream, in your own words, how would you define existentialism?
Well, existentialism for me is a philosophy and psychotherapy that deals primarily with human existence. And when you think about it, this is such a basic thing, because everybody exists, obviously, and everybody encounters some features of this existence. This is what existentialism deals with. Like, for example, we all have a body, and we all are like existing with this body, through this body. And this is something that is so basic that it is rarely thought about, like in the mainstream, I think. But existentialism then deals precisely with these kinds of questions, or like, what does it mean for me to have a body, and what does it mean for me to like experience world through this body, for example? And then what can happen with this? What are some experiences that I will inevitably encounter, you know, because I have a body, or because my existence is like limited in terms of time? And also some other things that are also universal and common to human experience, like we all are social beings, and we all also feel the need for like being alone. So these kind of contradictions, like being social versus being independent, or some other features, like we're all born into certain kind of circumstances. This is, I feel, especially important within existentialism. Like, what does it mean that we are born within certain circumstances? What does it mean for us, and what can we do with this? This is, the saying, what can you do with the cards you were given? This is something that existentialism puts an emphasis on. And I think this is where it's very valuable, because it, like, when you compare it to other approaches, I find that it has more an orientation towards the future. And this can be very illuminating if you try to apply it to your own personal experience, because it tries to like find the value in the situations you encounter in your life. And also when you combine all of these things, like the circumstances which are uniquely yours, because every one of us has like unique circumstances they were born into. So then this whole horizon opens of what does it mean that your experience is unique? What can you do with this unique experience you are thrown into, let's say? So yeah.
And in that vein, do you feel that it can contribute to people's well-being then? These
Yeah,
ideas?
definitely. Yeah, definitely, very much so. And this is precisely what I think that is very that it is not very well understood within mainstream, how much it can contribute, because I think that existentialism is very strong, that because it it dives right into the most I would say the most perhaps harsh is a bit harsh word, but the most the situations which we don't really usually deal with in our everyday existence. Like, for example, those most extreme situations. Like, for example, I can mention here Viktor Frankl, perhaps, because of his experience, with Auschwitz. And, this is the situation which is definitely very extreme, like concentration camps. So when one asks, what can you find as a meaning, or what can you find valuable in this situation? Is there something that you can still find meaningful in this situation, or is there some value that you can find? If you can see the situation in concentration camp with this, then I think you can just cover every other situation which is happening or can happen within human experience. And I think that particularly valuable in existentialism is that it orients you towards this value. Like, for example, in some other kinds of experiences which may seem very gloomy, like illnesses or terminal illnesses, or there's a lot of hard situations in human existence that can happen. Existentialism just, for me, has this way of like still giving you the option of finding like a value in it, or like, I don't know, it's like a silver lining, let's say, so like a wisdom, like what can you learn from this, something like that. Yeah,
I just think that is the most beautiful way to put it, and no one has phrased that like that for me before. That is one of the most powerful parts of existentialism, is that it orientates you towards this kind of hopeful way of thinking, that you can be, and I find that within my own life, that I can now, having been immersed in these philosophies and of course Frankl's books and his ideas, that I can be in a situation of suffering, or I can witness someone else in a situation of suffering, and in that moment I can say, this is nasty, this is horrible, this is uncomfortable, but I know that it can be valuable, and I'm going to make that choice to find
Yeah.
meaning in that and learn from it, like you say there.
Yeah, definitely. That has been also the most powerful for me. Like you can now, like Frankl said, if you know why, you can encounter everything. Like so it is like if you have a meaning, like you're oriented towards, then you can like. I mean, life is essentially like it's for me. It's a bit of an overlap with Zen Buddhism. I'm also interested in. So it also deals with like human life is about suffering. It's not about suffering, but suffering is inevitable. Let's say so. This is something that is going to happen one way or the other. So how can we see this? How can we approach this? How can we find value in this? Because suffering is not just about suffering, it's always also a process of growth, like which is not of course to minimize suffering, but that is kind of an exploration I'm interested in.
And yeah, and adding to that, I think we almost are raised to exist in a world where we're assuming that suffering is purely bad, that
Yeah,
everything is kind of geared towards how can we prevent suffering, how can we stop our suffering, how can we avoid suffering. And there's actively going against what is inevitable. We're going against that flow. We're denying the truths of what it means to be human. And I
I
think
agree.
apparently, I mean, I hear that existentialism gets a bad rap for being overly focused on negative and pessimistic, but I've never found that. I've always found it so hopeful because it accepts, it acknowledges that there is light and dark, that there is good and bad, that there is
Yeah,
suffering, there is joy. And it,
yeah, I definitely agree. For me, it's like, I mean, it's so obvious, that we're going to encounter suffering, but perhaps our current civilization just like wants to sweep it under the rug a bit. Like, why would you deal with suffering if you can, I don't know, watch Netflix, for example?
and
It's
to the
easier,
point that
perhaps.
and we get surprised when we experience suffering almost every time. Oh
Yeah,
my goodness, why is this happening to
yeah.
me?
What's wrong? Something went wrong somewhere. It's this like, it's not supposed to be like that. Like, it's what happened now with the corona crisis. We were all like massively shocked, and it was like it was not, you could often hear, I could at least often hear like, yeah, but it was not supposed to be like that. Yeah, but I don't know, I mean, what's life supposed to be like?
Indeed. And
Yeah,
also it's as if there has never been anything like this before.
yeah,
I mean, there have been very similar things. There have been worse things, there have been better things, there have been many things. It's just a thing, isn't it? It's just something to encounter. But it is true, there is
yeah,
a kind of global sense of alarm and shock and oh my goodness, something negative has happened. And now we are immediately in a position of this is a surprise. We're in a almost a fight flight, oh my goodness, what do I do situation, rather than okay, this
yeah.
is happening. I'm going to acknowledge it and embrace it and look at the opportunities within it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that this Corona crisis is definitely like a collective existential crisis a bit, because it has like, it has just like pulled us out of our everyday functioning, or even more radically, it has like put a stop to everyday functioning. And when that happens, then you like sometimes have no other options but to like think a bit about your everyday functioning and like to reassess some of the things that how you've been functioning until that moment. And that is what sometimes also happens when one is in existential crisis, I find. So this is actually a good opportunity to think a bit more about how we are also functioning as a society, if we are wise enough. Yeah.
And it makes me think of also what you were saying at the beginning about the influence of capitalism and about society. And I'm thinking about the news that is generating this sense of it's been a lost year. It's been a lost
Yeah.
year of existence. The children are a year behind. as if
Yeah.
all of throughout human history, every single person went to school exactly every day, and this one year, some of the population didn't go to school, and so they're going to be stunted in their intellectual growth and their,
Yeah.
as if half the live population of the current world have not missed their entire education because the resources not being shared.
But I think this shows that we were a bit like, like in a bit of a sleep mode, because we did. Okay, maybe it's different for me here, because here there was like a war 30 years ago. It was 30 years ago, but this was kind of like existential rupture, I think, here in Croatia. So there was, when this happened with Corona crisis, some of the older people then said like, oh, well, we survived the war, so this is like a second thing for us. It's not that we haven't encountered something like that before, but for people who are younger, perhaps this is like a shock, because you kind of are used to live in this neat world. Of course, you have problems, but then you are like surrounded by digital media, and you do your activities, and nothing ever happens, which is a rupture of this sort. But I think it also, of course, had some good implications, like this reassessment, and then I don't know, this international connecting also. There's some like with everything, there's some positive parts that we can now use, or we can think more about how we were living before. I would just hope that this would happen more on a global level,
and for me, that's where there is that connection between, like you were saying, Buddhism and existentialism, in that sense of connectivity. As a collective humanity, we are all connected. We are in the world inevitably with others, and having this opportunity to reflect on that. And I think this is where existential theories can be super valuable, to give different resources and different perspectives to consider that.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, this part that we're all interconnected, and that we're all like sharing an experience now more than ever, and especially with digital media, uh, uh, like now in times of coronavirus, you were just like uh, pulled towards functioning in digital environments all the time, and then you can just see in front of your eyes how you're sharing these experiences with like people or all over the globe, which is also very new in this sense, in such like a massive sense that it is happening right now. And also I think this can provide some other opportunities of like I have written an article about that recently, but it hasn't yet come out. It was about how this Corona crisis has had like twofold nature. Like on one side, it has kind of closed us within our local communities, and so we were also here given an opportunity to reassess in which context we are. And then simultaneously, this is interesting, it has connected us globally more than ever. So yeah, this is also interesting for me.
Yeah. And hopefully you can send the link so that when this is recorded, then we can have that one available.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So
And yeah.
I was just going to say, if you felt you wanted to share, other than COVID, or have there been times in your life where existential ideas have become really valuable?
Yeah, definitely. Like this is hard question for me to answer, because existential ideas are valuable to me every day. I try to live by them, because since I've discovered existential ideas, this has kind of been orientation in my life. So I'll always go back to that. It has kind of become like a way of being for me personally. But I've had some obviously existential crisis, or what could be termed like that, and where I didn't know what to do in my life, or didn't know the direction I am supposed to take, or felt some kind of alienation, because I'm a bit I have a different way of being, like when it comes to some contemporary forms of existence. I'm more like into reading books, and I'm not that into, of course, obviously, sometimes I love to watch Netflix, but I'm not into that as much. So sometimes I feel this sense of alienation with these contemporary forms of living. And with everything of that, existentialism has been immensely valuable for me, because I'm always going back to that, what my values are, what can I find valuable in this, like in this day, perhaps. Also, this particular part was given to me by, there's another existential psychotherapist in Croatia, which I can refer you to later. And he's called Milan Košuta, and he has also taught me this, like, what can you find valuable in this day, what is it that you can find as meaningful in this one day? So these are some of the things I try to live by, because it comes natural to me now. But also when you're encountered with a bigger crisis, of course, I mean, existentialism just for me goes straight to the root. And so it can really give an aid with this.
What drew you to it in the first place? How did you discover these existential ideas, or this kind of way of thinking, this way of orientating yourself?
Well, I was always drawn to these kind of questions. Like since I was young, I always considered like, why is there existence? Questions like this. What is the purpose of life? Why are we here? What's this all about? But I searched for these answers mostly in like literature and movies maybe. But then when I enrolled Faculty of Philosophy in Zagreb, I think that the first orientation towards existentialism was given to me there, because within sociology even I encountered first phenomenology, and this was totally new way of thinking for me, new way of looking at things. And also it taught me how to consider things in context, like in contextual way. And it's hard for me to pinpoint what exactly, because this was like, at that time in my life, this was like a mixture of things, because I just encountered some of the things within my studies, but I also did a lot of things by side. Like, for example, I was very much then into contemporary psychoanalysis. I discovered this by one person here in Zagreb who like show me these theories, and this was because contemporary psychoanalysis is also based on phenomenology. So I just drew all of these influences. I was drawn to them. I was like, they made me think in completely different way about the world. Like to see person always in context, to consider myself always in context. And also this is then interesting because that is kind of also what sociology does. But perhaps sociology puts different emphasis on this than maybe existentialism. But they're both concerned with context. So this is kind of an overlap. But then maybe sociology deals more with like how are we determined by our context, and existentialism deals also with, okay, but what can we do with this? Like maybe.
Yeah, this is a very coherent way to clarify that overlap. Yeah.
Yeah, and also, yeah, of course there were I don't know. Then also when I was studying, there was this American teacher and psychotherapist that came to Zagreb for a year, and she had a course in existential psychology. And then I enrolled this course, and then I discovered Irving Yalom and Rogers and all of these influences, and it was just like a thing that just rolled on. I just discovered more and more things, and then I got used to thinking in this kind of way. But it can also be a bit hard because this is not at least around here a mainstream kind of theory, I would say. But I definitely enjoy combining, my education and social sciences with this. I find this is a very valuable tool. I also sometimes write articles for Made in America, and I try to explore like, if you know that we are constructing the knowledge of the world in certain way, then how can we use this knowledge to like think differently about mental phenomena, for example? This is something that I very much like to explore. Yeah.
And you really highlight there that it's not just, you know, I was a human and then suddenly I'm an existentialist. It's not just like, oh, I read a book or I took a course and that is now my identity. It's this really kind of intricate, complicated, just tiptoeing into this world. And I wonder,
Yeah.
like we were saying at the beginning, why are not more people involved with it? For those who are interested or might view this video and go, I've heard about the word, but I have no idea really what it means or where I should start. What would you recommend as a kind of intro to existentialism?
Well, definitely. When I recommend to someone where they should start, I sometimes also do that with my friends because they then get interested. I tend to look at what kind of person uh, this person is, because I would say this is a bit different. If you're like into philosophy, then I would recommend, okay, start with some philosophers like Sartre or maybe Heidegger, or perhaps in the beginning, just like get some reader that sums up all of these, theories nicely. But like if person is more not that into philosophy, then I would perhaps suggest to start with some books or videos of some people who try to bring existentialism like more in manner of fiction. Like for example, Irving Yalom does that pretty good. Like and perhaps to get acquainted with existentialism in this way, or to perhaps listen to some lectures on YouTube. I always send some lectures which I find good, which explain existentialist ideas in a very like clear and concise manner to my friends. Yeah, like perhaps there.
I think that's the most existential way to recommend the introduction to existentialism. Look at the individual.
Yeah,
I mean,
it always comes to that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And
look at the
you're mentioning
context.
there the value of things like YouTube and documentaries and literature. Is there anything that has particularly inspired you that comes to mind on your own journey?
Well, I'm a bit particular because I'm a lot into science fiction. So for me, science fiction is very existential a lot of times. I find that it often tackles existential issues. Like, for example, these TV shows such as Star Trek, or I don't know if you know Battlestar Galactica, it's an older TV show. Also, they are very much about existential topics. They always like deal with existential topics within them, and also some newer films like Arrival, or I don't know, Contact, I think. There's for me a lot of existentialism in SF, but of course, if you don't like SF, then that's another topic. There are also some movies which are like classical, for example, Lost in Translation, I would find very existential because it also deals a bit with this. This is another thing that I think, why I think existentialism is very important today. Like Lost in Translation deals with this a bit. This alienation that we feel today, that is often present within contemporary modes of living, like this feeling that we are like alienated from being, from like something that is meaningful to us. And I think this also has to do with contemporary forms of existence, because the ways in which we live today is different than the ways in which it was lived like 2 or 3 centuries ago. Like today we have all of this choice, all of these opportunities, all of this choice. It was like unimaginable 2 or 3 centuries ago, because your life was then pretty given. like you had this course of life that you knew you were going to take, and there were no such choices such as today. You have to like choose your career. There are like questions of identity which are present every day. And so there is also this kind of I would also say imperative of choice a bit. Like you have to choose something. And then, of course, it brings a lot of existential, like perhaps guilt, or like a sense of responsibility. There's a big responsibility because what if you choose wrongly, you know? Yeah. And so this is also where existentialism is very valuable, I think, today, particularly today in modern society. Yeah. And so what I wanted to say, a bit of this is seen like in Lost in Translation. This like this movie is very nice for me. It's like it has this atmosphere, you know, it shows in a very mild way a bit of this alienation, but then like it also gives you some kind of hope, like that it can be overcome. Yeah.
And I think it's such an important point that these existential messages are already out there. They're so available, and so many people will have, you know, watched these films, engaged with this kind of thinking process, and be asking themselves and philosophizing, as it were, in their own way, in their own day to day, with their friends over conversations. And yet they don't, you know, they don't have to have read this ancient literature, this
Yeah.
complex literature, to actually be exploring existential themes. There's just something
Yeah.
about the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of an art, you know, I mean, it's definitely art to like, to like inspire people to think about these things, and not through like theory, you know, but just through like literature or film. I also, one other author comes to mind, if you know John Green. He's an American author, but he writes like novels for young people. But if you try to read them, I mean, the topics are so existential. It's very also for everybody, because he just dives in his books to very like the core of some experiences, which can be pretty hard, like his books, The Fault in Our Stars, I think it's called. If you know it, there was a movie, I think, also. It's about young people who, I think one person suffers from cancer, and then all of this existential questioning, and then all of this existential questioning of identity, falling in love, like disappointment, disillusionment with your ideals, idols. Yeah, it really has a lot of these themes, and also some other books of his, like Paper Towns, I think. I mean, in all of his books, he goes just pretty existential. So, yeah.
Why do you reckon it's important to be, I mean, I totally believe, I totally agree with you that it's so valuable when people inspire and encourage this way of thinking about existence, about ourselves, about the world, about meaning. But why do you think that that's important for people to do?
Well, I think that this has to do with like orientation in life, you know, because in existentialism also it is sometimes, I don't think that sometimes our lives are only about survival, you know, that we are also like symbolic beings. This is something that tends to be forgotten in today's way of life sometimes, because it's always about the work or making money, but we are also symbolic beings which have symbolic needs, and these needs are, we need to have some values in our lives in order to feel them meaningful, you know. And meaning can be very powerful. It can, I think, make you like go through situations or experiences which you wouldn't otherwise have strength to go through. So I think that is why this is important. I think it's not, you know, like the existentialism, it's so-called third force, as it was called in psychotherapy, always emphasizes this, that It's not that we are led by some other motives. We are also very much inspired in our lives or motivated by meaning, you know, although we might not be aware of this. This is not something that, this is very implicit, I would say. It's not something that you usually just think about, like, but it's always there, I think.
I know you've mentioned your blog, but what would you say was your existential offering, as it were? What would you like to share as kind of your contribution to this field, these ideas?
Well, I think that my, let's say, unique, but like from my own circumstances, what arose perspective and contribution is definitely this combination of like social sciences, humanities, and then existentialism, because I try to use both of them when I work or when I like think about these things. This for me is very intertwined, and for me it gives me the tools to like currently I'm like researching also in my articles like different ways of looking at mental processes or mental phenomena. This is also very close to existentialism. This is what existential approaches tend to do. But also I try to see like how are we looking at mental phenomena, and how can we look at them in other ways which are perhaps more meaningful or perhaps more constructive or perhaps more meaning making. This is something that I often find lacking in a lot of theories, like where's this symbolic dimension, you know? So that is kind of what I try to offer. This was also kind of a motivation behind my website to offer this, yeah. Like more meaning making like explanation or interpretation of certain experience. And just instead of just put it in a box and, you know, like for example, what I'm also working on an article currently, like, or I wrote about it in some of my recent articles, like for example, depression. You know, it's in mainstream, it often tends to be viewed as like biological malfunction or these other kind of categories, which are very like dry for me personally, because it's something that then tends to get a life of its own, like this category. It tends to also become something in social context, you know? If you say this is just like a biological malfunction, this is also a kind of a label that tends to be like a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is for me why I find this important also, but also to give people meaning, you know, because there's also something valuable. This is not to minimize pain. Of course, there's a lot of pain in these processes, so I have to emphasize this. But like, there's also some value, perhaps, which tends to be, you know, like just disregarded or just reduced to this malfunction. And but what can you like gain from this process? Maybe this is something that I'm exploring.
I love that description that other kind of concepts and theories can be kind of dry, and the existentialism adds this kind of extra kind of boost to it, as it were. And I so can identify with that, because obviously my path is psychology rather than sociology, but I remember enjoying and appreciating the kind of more mainstream approaches, but they are very more medicalized, more categorizable. And I remember as soon as I started engaging with the existential ideas, it just felt like there was just glitter and just everything shine on now. And to be doing my doctorate now, is like any essay, it's like I can write about something that's like very sensible and helpful, but then add this like pizzazz to it. Like, I don't know what it is it?
Yeah, that's how it happens for me also. When I encounter existential theory, it's always like, whoa, like it's always very, you know, shiny, and like all of the colors are there. Yeah, definitely. Also, I just, it's like I'm very passionate about this. I could talk about this for hours, and also I just get so, you know, excited about all of these things. Currently, I'm reading a book which I also got recommended through a webinar. This a biography of Rollo May. And it's so, for me, it's also like, oh my God, I could read this whole day. This is so interesting because it also shows how his personal life like molded his theory and how this developed. And I'm so, oh my God, I could just dive into this. This is so much, I don't know, just what you said, like glitter and colors and feelings and, everything makes sense. Yeah. And then people look at me like I'm so, and people are like, I don't understand. But that's it, I suppose. That's this fascination with existentialism, yeah. So I would really wish there would be more of it, like in mainstream also. I really hope to contribute to that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even just hopefully doing an interview like this and us being able to make these ideas more accessible, because obviously rather than having it all written in a very complicated book, which is based on theory,
Yeah,
us just chatting about it here now, and also we have potentially in the future the opportunity to have it translated, or even just the spoken English word can become more accessible, I'm hoping. To
yeah, I'm
people.
hoping too.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think this is very valuable, these interviews, yeah.
yeah.
And also I think perhaps, newer generations are more like prone to this digital format. Perhaps it's good like making videos because of that. Because in my studies, I also do a bit like digital media. And so I think this is perhaps the format that speaks to them most, so I hope this really helps to spread the message.
I think people can ostracize themselves from exploring different avenues by thinking, I'm cheating, or I'm not doing it properly, I'm not doing it professionally if I don't just immediately read a textbook that's really complicated. I think it's so valuable to have the opportunity to have a little look at a video, sit there, have your coffee, enjoy the
Yeah,
experience
yeah.
of dabbling into it, and then hopefully after that you have a little bit of a framework that then you can go and pick up a book if you feel inspired, and kind of build that framework a little bit with more detail.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's also the way we are getting a lot of new information today, don't we?
Yeah.
It's like you're sending your friends, look at this video, and then it's like little gifts, like, oh my God, these new ideas, like, yeah, thank you. That's how it happens for me at least, yeah.
Well, I
So
am
I think,
so excited to be sharing this video. Definitely excited. And I'm wondering, as we come towards the end, is there anything that you wanted to add, or is there anything you feel that we missed out?
well, I think we've covered pretty much everything, but I just wanted to say again that I think it's very important to spread this, and that it is important. Sometimes this happens for me, like, when I hang out with people and then we just touch upon a certain subject, and then because it comes naturally to me, I kind of mention some existentialist ideas, and I see people are interested, they're interested, they're open to this, but perhaps they didn't have a chance to encounter it before. So, but when you give them a little bit of this, a little bit of that, then they're interested, then they're going to search more for these ideas. So I think I'm very happy to be participating in this, and I hope we will spread the word further. Yeah. And I always say existentialism has changed my life, so I think it can do that for anyone.
I mean, I'm coming out of this interview feeling so much genuine energy within me, and so much passion and inspiration, and I feel like I want to engage with existentialism more, and I realize that I have been doing that for so many years already.
Yeah.
I feel this new urge to go and
Yeah.
explore now, so I really, really hope that whoever's watching this might have that same energy from watching you share this. And I cannot thank you enough for just being so explorative and so open. And thank you so much,
Yeah.
Iva.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for inviting me. This was a real pleasure. Yeah. I hope that we have some other opportunities to do that again. Yeah. And I
I'm
hope
sure
that
we'll make
people
it.
will find some, yeah, like interesting threads in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iva. You take care.
You take care too.